ThermalTake's S100 with its minimalist appearance looks pretty nice. But is it worth your time and money? Let's find out. What's up everyone, Eric here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. I've got a lot to go over, so I'm going to get right into this. Now, as always, there are timestamps in the description so you can jump to whatever interests you, but I do recommend you watch the whole review. The S100 is the smallest case in ThermalTake's S series lineup. Now, that doesn't mean that it's actually a small case, it's just the smallest in this lineup. It does come in either black or white and has an MSRP of $69 US. The S100 comes with only one 120mm rear exhaust fan pre-installed. The dimensions of the S100 are 44.1 centimeters high by 22 centimeters wide by 41.1 centimeters deep. ThermalTake does provide a small bag that has all the screws and fittings in it. There are also some zip ties, 2 reusable expansion slot covers, which I do appreciate. Finally, there's a small booklet. This is the manual, and I guess it's okay. I've definitely seen worse. The S100 has a solid metal front panel. This panel can be easily removed by pulling the bottom of the panel away from the chassis. The front I/O is on the top of the case, so you don't have to worry about damaging the cables when you remove the front panel. Taking a closer look at the front panel, there is a metal mesh running along the sides of the panel. Now, this mesh is fairly open, so it won't actually stop dust from getting into the case. Looking back at the chassis, there is no dust filter here as well, so dust buildup will definitely be a thing in this case. Moving to the top of the case, we see the front I/O. There are separate ports for the front audio out and microphone. There are 2 USB 2.0 Type A ports and 1 USB 3.0 Type A port, as well as a restart and power button. Now, there is a large magnetic dust filter along the top of the case. Moving to the rear of the case, we see the location of the rear I/O, the 120mm pre-installed exhaust fan. There are 4 horizontal expansion slots, all of which are break-off covers. Finally, at the bottom, we see the power supply location. Taking a look at the bottom of the case, there are 4 plastic feet. These feet give 22mm of ventilation for the power supply. All these feet do have rubber pads on them to help stop the case from sliding around. There is a removable dust filter for the power supply, but the only way to access it is to either tilt the case or to actually put the case onto its side. Moving on to the right side of the case, there is a steel side panel. To remove the right side panel, you need to undo the 2 thumb screws at the rear of the case, then slide the panel back and lift it away. This side panel is a bent sheet of steel with some okay sized grooves in it. It does feel pretty rigid, so it should do a good enough job. Moving on to the left side of the case, the left side panel is tempered glass. To remove the glass panel, swing the door open more than 90 degrees, then simply lift the glass panel up, being careful not to tip the case. This glass panel is 3mm tempered glass. There are 2 magnets along the front of the glass panel. These magnets are to hold the glass panel closed. Now, looking back at the case, there is a foam strip along the front, and this is to help with some sound dampening. Well, I guess that's it for the exterior of the case. Now, before I get into the interior of the case, if you like what I'm doing here, can you please hit that subscribe button? It helps out the channel a lot. And speaking of helping out the channel, I also have an Amazon Associates link. So if you click on one of the links in the description and then add an item or items to your cart and order them, the channel will get a small kickback. Okay, taking a look at the inside of the case, there is a basement. The shroud does have a window to the power supply location if that's something you're into. The top of the shroud does have honeycomb ventilation holes. These do match the top and rear of the case. The top of the shroud also has 4 cutouts for running cables. Now, looking at the motherboard tray, there are 2 cutouts along the top of the motherboard tray for running fan connectors, and there are 2 more cutouts in each top corner. The cutout at the rear is for your EPS cables, and the cutout at the front is for the cables of the front I/O. But most of your cables will be running through the 3 large vertical cutouts at the front of the case. The ThermalTake S100 does support mini ITX and micro ATX motherboards. The maximum GPU length is 330mm, but that will be cut down if you add fans to the front, and will be cut down even more if you go with a front-mounted radiator. The max CPU cooler height in this case is 165mm. Okay, turning the case around and taking a look at the backside of the motherboard tray. There is up to 20 millimeters given behind the motherboard tray for running cables. There are also a number of cable tie-offs to help with cable management. There are two 2.5-inch drive sleds that fasten to the backside of the motherboard tray with captive thumb screws. Moving on to the basement, we see a 2-bay drive cage. This drive cage can hold either two 3.5-inch drives or two 2.5-inch drives, or one of each. With the cage in its stock orientation, there is 190 millimeters given for the power supply and cables. Now this cage can be easily moved or removed. To do so, simply remove the two screws on the bottom of the case and the one thumb screw on the drive cage itself. Once the screws are removed, slide the drive cage towards the left side of the case and lift it away. To reinstall the cage, simply align the cage to the desired rails, push the cage in, and refasten the screws. With the drive cage in its frontmost position, there is 210 millimeters for the power supply and cables, and if you remove the drive cage, there will be 360 millimeters for the power supply and cables, but this will be cut down if you go with a bottom-mounted front fan. So this brings us to the cooling options. As I said before, there is one 120 millimeter pre-installed exhaust fan at the rear. This fan has a 3-pin fan connector and has a RPM of around 1300, but this case can support up to 6 120 millimeter fans. So that's 3 fans at the front, 2 fans along the top, and 1 fan at the rear. Now, if you prefer to have 140 millimeter fans, then you can have up to 4 140 millimeter fans. That's 2 at the front and 2 along the top. Now, if you really do want to get crazy, you can actually fit a 200 millimeter fan along the top. Now, for radiator support, you can have up to a 280 millimeter at the front or up to a 280 millimeter along the top, and or a 120 millimeter at the rear. Okay, that's it for the overview. If you are finding this video helpful, you may want to check out some of my other case reviews. I'll link a card above to that playlist, and I'll also have it linked down in the description. Moving on to my build notes. Starting off with the cable management, I was able to fit the non-modular power supply as well as all the cable extensions while keeping everything fairly clean looking. I had no issue getting the right side panel on when I was all done. Now, I did notice something odd when I was installing the fans for the temperature testing, and that's they don't line up very well with the CPU and GPU, and this is because of the tooling. You just don't really have much play on how you can position the fans. So because of this, I did end up running a few more temperature tests than I really wanted to, just to kind of figure out what's going on in the case. Other than that, I don't really have any other notes. Like, there's nothing special about the case that I feel like I need to go over, and there's nothing really bad about the case that I feel like I need to go over. Okay, so moving on to the temperature testing, but before I get into the results, if you have any questions on how I test the cases, please check out my case testing methodology video. I'll have a card above, and I'll also link it in the description. Now, I have tested a few different fan configurations along with the stock fan configuration, starting off with the CPU workload temperature. With the one stock fan, it had an average CPU temperature of 71.1 Celsius. When I added 2 front intake fans, the average CPU temperature dropped to 69.5. Now, in the stock configuration, when I removed the panel and filters, the average CPU temperature was at 69.2. And with the one stock fan as a rear exhaust, when adding in 3 front intake fans, the average CPU temperature was 67.6 Celsius. Okay, for the gaming temperatures, the stock configuration had the average GPU temperature at 78.8 Celsius, with the average CPU temperature at 49 Celsius. And when I added the 2 front intake fans, the average GPU temperature dropped to 76.4 Celsius, with the average CPU temperature being at 44.2 Celsius. So with the one stock fan with no front panel or filters, the average GPU temperature was 73.8 Celsius, and the average CPU temperature was 44.2 Celsius. When running the one stock exhaust fan with 3 front intakes, dropped the average GPU temperature to 70.2 Celsius, and the average CPU temperature dropped to 42.4 Celsius. I will also be posting all these charts to the HFG Discord server. You will need to be a member to be able to see them, but it is completely free to become a member. All you have to do is agree to the server rules, and there is a link in the description to the HFG Discord server. Now, comparing the S100's stock configuration to all the other cases I've tested, starting with the sound level testing. Now, you do need to keep in mind that the S100 does come with only 1 fan. So having a dBA of 34.5 does make a bit of sense. It matches exactly up with the P300A, which again comes with one fan. Moving on to the CPU workload test. It is just about at the bottom of the list, thanks to it coming with only one fan. Now for the gaming testing, and again, it's just about at the bottom of the list. Moving on to the noise equalized testing. So all the cases have been noise equalized to 35 dBA. Unless they don't actually reach 35 dBA, then they're just running at full speed. In the CPU workload test, it's again near the bottom of the list. And for the noise equalized game testing, the S100 is at the bottom of the list. Now for the fan normalized testing, the S100 had a sound level of 38.8 dBA, and that is with the 4 Arctic P12 fans, which does land it on the top end of this list, so this is a fairly quiet case. In the fan normalized CPU workload test, the S100 is at the bottom of the list, having an average CPU temperature of 67.2 Celsius. That's not to say that 67.2 Celsius is a bad temperature, it's just not as good as the other cases. Now for the gaming test with the normalized fans, this has the S100 again at the bottom of the list, with an average GPU temperature of 78.1 and an average CPU temperature of 43.9. So what do I think of ThermalTake's S100? It looks nice, it's easy to build in, and it comes in different colors. Now all of these are good, but the MSRP of $69 US is pretty much a lie as far as I can tell. Because based off my testing, you'll definitely want to add in the 3 front intake fans, because as you can see in this chart, there's a 8.5 degree difference between having the 3 front intake fans over the stock fan alone while gaming. I would also like to point out that the 3 front intake fans is again 8 Celsius cooler than the fan normalized test configuration. And now my guess on why this is happening is that the location of where the fans are relative to the CPU and GPU are creating some sort of weird airflow pocket thing at the bottom of the case, which is just having the GPU recycle its own hot air. Same number of fans in the case, but there's an 8 Celsius difference. Where you put the fans in this case really does matter. So if you are thinking of buying this case, you really should be adding in the cost of 3 fans to put on the front there, which makes that 69 USD MSRP a lie or a really bad idea at best. Like it just, you'll have to add in those 3 fans because temperature wise, your system will thank you. Something else you should keep in mind is that you'll likely need to blow out your case every 6 or so months because of the lack of a dust filter on the front. Now, I'm not saying that blowing out your case is an issue. I do it pretty much every 6 months. It's more of a matter of fact that you will need to do that. Now, don't get me wrong, the S100 is a pretty nice case. The build quality is pretty good. There's plenty of storage options. The system temperatures are okay if you add in those 3 front intakes. It really comes down to the price that you can buy it for, because you need to add in those 3 front intakes. If you are buying it at that MSRP of $69 US, you're paying too much. Like, there are other cases that are cheaper that then will do a better job, that give you more fans, or there are better options at $69. I would think $55 to $60 US would likely be a much better, or at least a much more fair price when comparing to other cases. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Please follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below, and it is completely free to join. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.